Hi, everyone. Today I have with me Manuel Lima, who has authored New Designer, Rejecting Myths and Embracing Change. Hi, Manuel.
Hi, Bob. Pleasure to
It's
be here
good,
with you.
good to have you with us. Um, I'm real excited about talking with you about your book, and it really spoke a lot to me about the need to change design and change it in a way that makes it a force for good. I mean, we're surrounded by design everywhere we look, and much of it is spectacular. And we've created a pretty awesome world. But at the same time, we've also designed a lot of things that haven't worked for us and have made the world worse. So having your book out there, I think, can inspire designers to really kind of rethink what it is that they're doing and how it is that they can design a better world. So one of the questions I'd like to start with is you recommend in the book to your readers to revisit the book from time to time to remind themselves why they became designers. So I'd like to start with that question. Why did you become a designer?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I was very intrigued with design as a practice, I think, from early days. On one side, I do recall being very into maps from an early age. And when I was young, we didn't have, of course, GPS or none of the new technologies that we have become so accustomed to. And I did travel quite a lot with my parents all over the world. And my dad used to travel a lot also for business. And so I do remember we had this cabinet at home and it was filled with like physical maps that we brought together collectively as a family or that he brought on the several trips that he made. And at some point, I was maybe 10 or 11, and I committed myself to actually organizing this cabinet. And I was mesmerized by just those maps, the diversity of graphical languages that they had, all this iconography and symbols, and how it changed from country to country. It was almost like learning new languages, from a very graphical way.
Uh-huh.
And then and then I was maybe 16 when I read the book by Bruno Munari, Design as Art. And that's really what changed it for me because I love that approach of Bruno Munari saying that design is not meant to be a piece on a museum. It's not about art anymore, right? It's time for designers to step down from the pedestal that they have been used to being and design and create for the masses, creating anything and make the human condition better and the
Uh-huh.
world better as a result. And for me, this more utilitarian, kind of pragmatic view of design was really touching me at a much deeper level than a lot of the preconceived ideas that I had about design as a piece in a museum, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's when the passion for design started. And
Uh,
I remember like my dad, when he was traveling, he used to bring me all these like objects from like, I don't know, an airline that it came that the spoon would turn into like this fork. And it became just more attuned as a dad to like the things that would interest me from a design standpoint. And he would bring me all of this. I remember this thing that he brought me from Japan. It was like this incredible, like almost like a Swiss army knife, but for drawing. You had like the ruler and you had like all these
uh,
pens. It was like fascinating object. I've kept that one, for years now, for decades. So yeah, so I
fa-
think that's really where my passion for design started.
Fascinating. It's interesting how early experiences like that, way back in your
Yeah,
childhood, can affect the way you think about things for the rest of your life.
absolutely. Absolutely.
It's interesting too in your earlier books, the Book of Circles and the Book of Trees. They're explorations of and histories of visual forms, and that kind of is explained by what you just talked about. But this new book is really very different. I wondered what motivated you to write it.
Well, I do like to challenge myself every so often. It is a bit of a cliche, but I think there's a lot of truth in cliches. And one cliche that I've sort of really guided I think most of my entire career is life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And every time that I feel too comfortable, feeling that I know all of it already, that's when I know it's time to move on. So one of the reasons is that I really wanted to challenge myself. I had done 3 books that are very similar in nature, even though the scope is very different, but they are very heavy with imagery and illustrations, diagrams and apps and charts. This one does not have one single image. So that was a huge challenge for me. In a way, it was actually easy. I like to say that my previous books are the hardest ones to make, because not only do you have to do the writing and the research, you also have to spend a huge amount of time asking for image rights and going after the authors. It's just a huge pain. And it takes so much more time. So having a book with no images was, in a way, a relief, right? It was a way of challenging myself, but also kind of a relief, to be honest. But I think that at the core, this book started when I was going through probably like a midlife crisis.
Oh,
when I turned 40. And I by the way,
still a youngster.
I'm still a youngster, but I think there's something about 40 that makes you think a little bit deeply about your life, your existence. And I actually dislike the word crisis, but because I don't think it's actually, there's nothing negative about this midlife period that you go through, in the sense that it forces you to look inward, right? And to do some introspection about what do you want to do with the rest of your life? What things you don't want to do, and what do you want to do? So actually not going through a midlife crisis for me is much scarier, because then you might get that to a point, it's like, what did I do with my entire life, right? So I think it's very healthy that you do question yourself halfway through your existence, and you change things accordingly. And as I was doing this introspection, I looked, of course, me professionally, what I've done, what I want to keep doing. I even created a mission statement for myself, like the things to really identify what drives me and the things that I'm really passionate about. And that was actually very productive. I came to the realizations, the things that I really care about and I want to be doing more in the future. And even the other day, I was listening to this quote by someone saying, there's no such thing as stress. You're just not doing what you like doing most, right? You're just busy doing things that you don't care. So there's something of truth to that. But then as I was going through this crisis, let's say, it was also an opportunity for me to not just question myself as a professional, but also my profession, what we were doing as a community, right? As a practice, as a discipline, as a design discipline. And this was at a time that I'd been working in many startups, big and small, also many large tech conglomerates like Microsoft and Google and Nokia. And I had enough experience to realize how much design can do good things, but also how sometimes design is actually going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And for me, the interesting question, and I think this is how the book came about, is why? Why designers, for the most part, are so well-intentioned and wanting to have this really positive impact into the world. And why do we have this moral failing of many aspects of design, really failing to reach that full potential of what they want to be at? And the question of why was always lingering in my head. Like, why is that happening, right? Why is this occurring? And I think that's really how the notion of the book started sort of manifesting itself. It started off as letters to a young designer kind of a format, as if I was like writing to my younger version of myself.
Yeah.
Then it morphed into what we have today. As you know, like writing is always a process. You start somewhere and you end up in a whole different place through various reasons. And I think this is the case for the book as well.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I love your use of quotes throughout the book, those both from designers and non-designers. And of all of the quotes in your book, I wonder which one is your favorite, if you have one.
Oh, I have so many that I love.
I bet.
So many that I love. It's so hard. I mean, I will mention two that I really like. One is by, I think, a British designer that says that planet Earth has become a design space. And I love this quote because I think many often design lacks in ambition. We are working on a very minuscule scale. Take the word system,
Yes.
for example, right? Anytime designers talk about systems, they talk about system as a design system. And the design system is nothing else than a library of components, of digital components, buttons, tabs, panels, boxes, all of that. And how the system works in a cohesive way and how
Yeah.
consistent it is throughout the entire digital platform or experience. That's as far as it goes when it comes to system. So when they think a designer, when they say a designer needs to think in a systemic way, that's what they are implying. Think
Yeah.
about the user interface in a consistent way. Again, I think it lacks a tremendous amount of ambition. And I love that quote because it really pushes designers to think about the ultimate design system, which is planet Earth, and really understanding the full repercussions of what we're doing to this planet and understanding the myriad of networks and ecosystems that abound this beautiful, beautiful planet. So that's one quote that I love. The second one is by a Finnish designer, Eero Saarinen, that mentions that always always design something with the next context in mind. So if you are creating a chair, think about that chair in a space, in a room. If you are designing a room, think about that room in the context of a house. If you are designing a house, think about that house in the context of a neighborhood. If you are designing like a city, think about that in context. So always go one step further. And I think that quote is super important to think about the scale of repercussions of what we are designing. So if you are designing a mobile app, right, don't think about that mobile app just as a little icon on the home screen. Think about that mobile app as a full-time companion, as a friend that's in your pocket. People spend more time with their mobile phones than with any other human being in this day and age, right? So what kind of companion do you want to create? One that is nagging you and making you addicted and it's like destroying your mind, or one that's actually a supportive friend that wants to actually have you be the best version of yourself, right? So think about the next context. It's super important. And I think if only more designers would think in that term, they would understand sometimes the full repercussion of what they are doing. And that's not always easy. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the lack of systems thinking in this broader sense that you're talking about is really the source of a lot of the problems that we've created with our designs, that they make sense within the narrow context of designing a room or designing an app, but in the larger context, there are all kinds of ripple effects that they have that are unanticipated and not examined subsequently, that end up having a negative impact, even though that wasn't our initial intent. But we don't follow through on that. And I think that creates a lot of problems for us.
Exactly.
Much of the book,
just to extending on that, sorry,
sure,
is to your point about this like idea of like understanding the next level of context to your design solution. Sometimes it's fairly unintended, right? So designers in this day and age, there's no notion of like a single designer anymore, really. It's especially the tech industry has destroyed that myth, right? We have teams of designers creating things that are used not by thousands or even millions, but by billions of users at times.
Yeah.
At Google Cloud, we had a team of 400 designers. Google Cloud alone was 400 designers. So what happens is that you end up working on a very minuscule part of that application, and you don't really even realize the grand scale of what you are actually creating, right? The whole, you know some of the parts, but you never see the full magnitude of that scale.
Yeah.
And you don't see the repercussions of what that thing is creating on society and or on the environment, right? So that's the problem, because sometimes designers are oblivious to the impact that they are creating because they are simply not seeing the full scale of the solution.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
No.
Much of the book is about the myths that designers have but must give up if they want to be a force for good. There are many myths you talk about, but of all of them, I wonder which one is the most harmful to designers and in the design profession.
Ooh, it's tough, because I do feel, and this could be helpful for your audience as well. The book is structured in, all 9 myths are structured around 3 areas. One is personal impact, societal impact, and environmental impact. So 3 each. And I felt the need of doing personal impact, because you have to put your mask first before you help others, right? You have to be a fulfilled individual and knowing what you are doing, the best of what you can actually do as a creative professional, before you get to commit to anything else, right? So that's what was the focus of my first 3 chapters. But if I was to pick one that is the most detrimental, I say it's probably number 7, design is for humans. Because we are so attached to this idea of human-centered design. And yes, it has brought us many good things, but it continues percolating this notion that what we do, the ultimate stakeholder of what we do is actually a fellow human, in most cases, a customer, when it's simply not true. Whatever you do, either a physical object or a digital solution, the ultimate owner and the ultimate user will not be a human. It will be a landfill somewhere. So if we start thinking about the ultimate stakeholder of a design solution being the environment, planet Earth, I think a lot of harm could be avoided, right? And that doesn't mean, or that doesn't change a lot of the concepts and a lot of the models and the principles behind human-centered design. That can still apply. We just need to elongate that journey, right? Understand the full repercussions. It doesn't stop at the user, it doesn't stop at the customer. The life journal of many things we create continues on. And for us to ignore that dramatic slice of that lifespan is quite irresponsible, I would say. We are just ignoring a huge area of many that can actually cause harm, not just to the environment, but also society.
Yeah. You mentioned in the preface of your book that design students rarely get exposed to ethical issues in their design courses. And I wonder how you propose that design programs include ethics in the curriculum. It's kind of pretty controversial idea in a way. But on the other hand, I think, as you point out, essential if we're going to have design as a force for good. How do we get around that controversy?
I think it's essential, and I don't even think that ethics is the only sort of thing that we are missing in design programs, and we can talk about the other factors, but ethics is absolutely paramount that we included. I always go back to my early days back in college as an undergrad, and I had friends of mine who were studying medicine or law, and I was always impressed by the deep sort of deontological roots that they have, strong ethics. They really care about that, right? Being, either a law student or a medical student. And it always struck me as really odd that designers and architects, as being the primary shapers of all material culture around us, are not guided by any sense of ethical duty. I found that always to be quite, remarkable. And that gap continues to this day. And in part, it's because a lot of design schools are still very connected or associated with art schools and art practice in general. That's part of the problem. And which could also explain another of the gaps. It's not just ethics, as I was mentioning. I think cognitive science is a huge blind spot for design curriculum. And of course, the environment, ecology is another huge blind spot. So I think there's a lot of like areas that design programs really need to take into account. And if anything, we are taking a step backwards as you see a lot of these new programs being put out, most of them online or in a hybrid model where you just study there for 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks, and all of a sudden you have that certificate and you are ready to design, right? And that's really continuing this idea of design as production, design as just a mere tool for achieving something. And I think there's so much more to design than that. And I think we keep falling into that trap of design as production.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's interesting. Ethics often consists of statements about what we shouldn't do, and that, of course, is important. But since design is a creative, constructive, productive profession, it makes sense for designers to think of ethics as a way, as saying something about what we should do. And I wonder for you, what are the shoulds for designers? What should we be doing? What are the ethics? What are the shoulds of our ethics?
That's a great point. I mean, it really starts with questioning. A lot of times ethics, and I think there's actually another quote in the book that talks about this, your ethics can only go so far as your line of questioning, right? So if you don't question enough, you're never going to really understand what's happening to your given design solution. So being aware of what you're doing and questioning nonstop, what is this being used for? And how is it being used? How is it being received by the general audience? How is it being received by customers? How are they using it? How is it benefiting them? So question nonstop the final usage of your design solution. It's your moral and ethical obligation to do so. And just be aware. It's too easy for us to dissociate ourselves from that responsibility. And that's really embedded in our design models, in our design curriculum. I mentioned this in the book, the double diamond, one of the most famous models, right, of the design process, is tremendously outdated. Why? And it's not the only one. Most of the design models are outdated in that sense because they keep on repeating the same myth. The myth is that, and it's a very fallacious myth, the myth is that the job of a designer ends with the delivery of that solution. Right?
Yeah.
So you do whatever you have to do the research. There's a lot of steps that happen in order to create the right design solution. But your job ends when you launch it, right? When you deliver it into the world. Now, if it actually lands, who cares about launches if you don't care about landings? You should be caring about landings. How does it land on the ground, and who is it actually benefiting from this design solution? Designers don't care. They wash our hands. It's the end of our job, and it's also the end of our responsibility. I just wash my hands and I go back to the next project. And even the way designers today are evaluated in most of the Silicon Valley companies that I've worked at and I've seen, they are evaluated in the number of launches, not landings, or whether a launch is actually meaningful for society or for the environment. Who cares? It's about the number of things that I put out. So for me, and that's basically what drives their salary, it drives their bonus, their promotion. It's all based on the number of things that they put out. Launch, nonstop.
Yeah.
No one cares about the landings, right? So I think it's tremendously responsible that we continue going on that path and we continue launching things into this vacuum of consequences. We cannot continue sustaining as a species, as a community, as a practice. It's just no longer a viable path for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I really draw on Herb Simon for kind of my conceptualization of design. And for him, designers are people who take the current situation and turn it into the desired situation. So the process in between, going from current situation to desired situation, is is, of course, important to design, but it's the impact, it's the desired situation. And if we go through all of this that we normally think of as design, and we don't get the desired impact, then it doesn't seem like our designs are good. So I really resonate with your point there.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
I love it that you give a lot of actionable advice at the end of each chapter. What one piece, I realize that I'm narrowing you in for this interview, but what one piece of actionable advice would you like our audience to walk away with today? Is there one?
Well, I would like the audience to walk away, especially if they are non-designers, to think that designer is much more than meets the surface, right? So we are, of course, especially non-designers that are not too much involved what it takes to actually create a design solution. We are, of course, all of us surrounded by a myriad of design objects, right? We just turn our heads and we see countless objects that have been thought and designed by a fellow human being. Ideally, hopefully, a designer. So there's much more than meets the surface. There's so much effort in creating the right, tools, the right technology, the right object, being digital or physical. So I think, if anything, my book is really an open door for you to get to know that world a little bit better. So that would be, one piece of advice. Just there's so much more about design that just meets the eye. There's so much knowledge and so much care below that surface, and I really encourage people to get to know that process a bit better.
Super.
Yeah.
I apologize for forcing you to reduce your many important thoughts to just a few, but let me turn that around and allow you a bit of expansiveness. With the book in print, is there something you now see that you wish you could have included in the book?
That's one of the major pain points of writing books, as you know, right, Bob? And
Yes.
and my previous books, I have faced that countless times. I think it's even worse doing the types of books that I've done because they tend to be some sort of like a compendium of imagery around a given topic, a visual metaphor. And the worst thing is that as soon as the book is out, someone sends me an image of this tree diagram that they saw, and it's like, oh my God, I don't have that in the book, So you feel so bad. Now, for the new designer, I think it's mostly. I don't think there's a topic that I regret not having included, but it's really about how many of the topics are changing almost daily, right? So I do talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and automation and a few of those things. But what's interesting about that is that as soon as the book is out, it's already outdated in some ways, because that field is so quickly morphing and changing into a myriad of other things. And even though I felt like I tried even in the last revisions to be as up to date as possible, it's inevitable that there's so many new developments that the book will never caught up to. In a way, I think we as writers, we have to write something that will last a long period of time without being too attached to the specific technological developments that are happening this year or the next. So hopefully some of the major sort of principles and discussions and topics that the book provides will be still meaningful many years from now and many decades from now. That's
I think you're right. I think that's the best strategy to follow, at least for the kind of book that you wrote. And I think it will. I think your book has a lot of staying power, and it's the kind of thing that I think designers can return to throughout their career, to continually, as you put it, continually question themselves and what it is that they're doing and the impact that they're having with their designs. And I think that's really the important part of your book, and the important function that it will continue to serve for a long time. And I really appreciate you writing the book. It's a real important addition to our discipline. And
Thank you
I
so much,
thank
Robert. That
you.
really
I
means a
thank
lot.
you.
Means a lot.
I thank you so much for this time together. This has really been a fascinating interview. I've really enjoyed it, and
Me too.
hope you have too.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure, Paul. Yeah.
Super.